Pai nosso, que estais no céu, santificado seja o vosso nome. Venha a nós o vosso reino, seja feita a vossa vontade, assim na terra como no céu, assim na terra como no céu. O pão nosso de cada dia dai-nos hoje, ó Senhor. Perdoai as nossas dívidas, assim como perdoamos aos nossos devedores. Não deixeis cair em tentação, mas livrai-nos de todo o mal. Não deixeis cair em tentação, mas livrai-nos de todo o mal.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon for those who are in Europe. We are very happy because this is Saturday again, and the United States Spiritist Federation is bringing to you in a series of talks, another talk, this time with our friend, Dan ASSISI. But before we introduce Dan ASSISI, as always, we like to start with our prayer. And so we are going to invite each and every one of you to join us in this prayer. And we pray for the assistance and guidance of the good spirits, the benefactors that have been with us and guiding us in this journey of learning and improving ourselves through spiritism, through spiritual values. We ask for the guidance and protection of our guest speaker, Dan ASSISI, and for all of us, that we may be with open hearts and open minds to gather everything that he's about to give to us through his talks. And we ask permission to start this talk. So today we also have something else to announce. Not only we are broadcasting to the YouTube channel of the United States Spiritist Federation, but for the first time, we are also broadcasting through the International Spiritist Council YouTube channel, the TVSA. So check TVSA or the United States Spiritist Federation. So let us welcome Dan ASSISI, and I'm going to introduce him. Hello, Dan. How are you doing today?
Good. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you so much. It's always wonderful to have you here and to have you share with us your expertise, your knowledge, and your joy, because it's always so wonderful to listen to your talk. So Dan ASSISI, he's a founding member of the Spiritist Institute, a non-profit organization dedicated to advancing Spiritism and the English-speaking world. The executive director of the California Spiritist Association and the host of the Spiritist Conversation podcast. Dan speaks about Spiritism and spirituality in the U.S. and abroad, and has given talks in over 60 cities in 4 continents, and is finishing, well, actually he finished already his first book, Our Road to Damascus. Daniel holds a doctorate degree in education and a master's in public administration with a graduate certificate in public policy from the University of Southern California. So without further ado, let us start hearing and what Danielle is going to present to us today.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jusada. Thank you for that lovely introduction. It is a pleasure to be here with you guys today. I am very excited that we are also having a chance to talk to our folks here in the US, but also abroad. So a big thank you to the United States Spiritist Federation for this chance for us to get together. And hi to our friends at TVC as well. It's really exciting to have Spiritists throughout the world connecting and having a chance to be with each other. Today, you're going to have to put up with me for a little bit. Hopefully, we're going to do about 15 minutes or so, unless I get really excited and continue to babble. And we're going to talk about a new command, from selfishness to selflessness. That is our topic. And after that, we are going to have a chance to interact with questions. If you're out there, we would love to have you interact. We love when you say hello and send us questions along the way. I will do my best to keep monitoring your comments here. And if there's something that pops up in the middle, I will tackle it. If not, we'll have a chance to do that in the end. So once again, I am really thrilled to be with you here today. I know that it's a Saturday, and I appreciate that you could be doing other things with your time. And remember that these talks are always available too on YouTube, so you can always go back to them if there is too much going on in your life right now. But why this topic then? Why these things? So. And are you giving me a commandment? What is this thing about a new commandment? What does that mean? Well, let me tell you a little bit about why I find this topic interesting. For a while now, I've been thinking a little bit of how did we get here, right? What's going on in the world, and how can we make it a better place to begin with? And I think all of us can agree that things are, a little rough right now. So I think that we can start thinking about the fact that, the world is in trouble. Let's just be honest a little bit. There are lots of different things going on in the world. We have, obviously, COVID, which has changed the way we lead our lives. We also have had so much conflict throughout the world, be it in into armed conflict or, increased rates of violence in different places. We are still having tons of trouble or valuing every life in this planet. And we still are treating, especially in our country as well, some people differently than others. So we're still struggling quite a bit with social justice, racial equity. So there's so much going on. And from an outside perspective, it can look like the world is really in trouble. So we're struggling. We're struggling as a group of people. We are struggling as neighbors. We are struggling as countries. We're struggling as human beings. We're struggling in finding a way to lead our lives that would lead us both to happiness and at the same time will help us respect each other and live together with each other. So the world is in trouble, I think. But there's hope. There's absolutely hope. But, in Spiritism, we like to take a quick look at everything around us and go deeper into the causes of these things. So our approach today is to try to understand a little bit of how did we get here, right? How did we get here? And more importantly, where do we go from here? At the end of the day, when I think about all of this, I really start thinking about our moral compass. What is it within our preconceived ideas or our world construct? What is it about our philosophies? What is it about our behavior that leads us to act in this specific way? And that's interesting because the way that we are behaving, it's not necessarily, collectively, right? I'm not pointing fingers here. It's not necessarily working out great for us because never in the history of mankind have we had so much comfort, so much technology, and so many resources. Yet, never before have we had so much strife when it comes in when it gets to quality of life. And why do I say that? I say that because we have an indicator that's been rising, and that is the level of suicides. And that indicator tells us that even if we have all these great things, even if we have all this great technology, and we can probably say that never in the history of humankind have we had so much ease in living and having food on our tables and so forth. And yet, with all of those things, if we were really making sense of the world around us, we would have less and less people wanting to end their physical lives. So the fact that there's so many people who are still opting to exit this life, thinking that they will be done with life in general and that they will simply disappear, is an indication that we as a society are not happy, that we're not finding our stride. And so the question that comes to my mind is, if all of this is true, then what is our moral compass? What is this thing that we have taken in, that we use to guide our lives? And are there any tweaks or changes that we may be able to do to make us perhaps feel a little happier, understand the world better, and not lead ourselves to think that we should check out of life? And that could lead us perhaps to be kinder to each other and therefore happier in the world in general. So that's the rationale behind all of this. So this whole idea of a new commandment really isn't about telling you what to do or not to do, but it's really, as you're going to see, as I will develop later, this idea that we may be missing an important piece of our Western traditional thinking that we need to bring in these important times that we live in, so that we can both live in harmony with each other, but also find more fulfillment in our lives. And that's what we hope to get to. But if you will indulge me, we need to build some context and talk a little bit about things. And I want to offer you a way of looking at it too, that is not just as binary as, it's not as binary as, right or wrong, right? So one of the things that we can look at in our Western tradition is this important set of moral ethics, which I think many of us might know as the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments are 10 laws or 10 suggestions or recommendations. Well, we're pretty sturdy in the beginning, right? Come from Moses to help us live in harmony with each other. And you might have seen this before. It's, thou shalt not have no other God before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord in vain, or honor your father and your mother. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. And all these things. But I think we can agree that a lot of these rules that we're told that we could not do or that we should do, a lot of these 10 commandments, these 10 rules are still happening today. I mean, you should not kill or murder is still happening, right? And you should not commit adultery. I think we can all agree that we are having tons of, relationship problems out there. So clearly, this idea of having a set of 10 things that we do or specifically do not do to lead us into social stability and social harmony is not suiting us as it should. And so could it have, do we need anything else? Do we need more rules? Do we need more commandments? What are we missing here, and how are we here? Well, one theory I want to share with you is this little video that I'm going to show you now, and hopefully the sound's going to come through, of why is it that the world is in shambles a little bit. So let's see straight from Moses here. Let's see. And there you have it. Maybe Mel Brooks got it right? Maybe there were supposed to be 15 commandments, and Moses dropped 5, and we only have 10, and that's why the world is the way it is. Clearly, it's a joke, but it begs the question of, what are we missing? What are we missing here? Is there some other divine wisdom that we could have, that we would have access to if Moses didn't give us, didn't drop that extra tablet with the extra 5 commandments, right? Clearly, does not explain why the world is perhaps struggling a little bit, but it gives us a sense that these 10 commandments, this idea that we could be given a list of what to do or not to do, mainly what not to do here, would be enough, would satisfy our rational minds, and would speak to our hearts about things in general. So where do we go from now? Well, the thing about the 10 Commandments that's very interesting as well, and I think that's about us thinking about things in general, is this idea that things can be black or white, right? That on one side, if we don't obey these 10 commandments, then we are selfish or we are bad people. And the other side, if we obey all these 10 commandments and obey this punch list of things to do, we are good people or we are altruistic people. So this kind of thinking leads us to a very easy understanding of the world. You either are or you are not. It's either 0 or 100, right? It's two extremes of this line, this line of progress. Imagine this line over here that I'm showing you as a line of progress, of advancement, of achievement, whatever it is that you want to think, but from a moral character perspective and a behavior perspective. So as we walk the line here from the left to the right, our goal is to leave collectively this place of selfishness where we are harping on each other, struggling with each other, and move ourselves to a place where we are more altruistic. What do I mean by that? When we act for others out of devotion, dedication to their welfare, when we sincerely take care of people's needs because we want to. And which is definitely very opposed to the idea of selfishness, when we only act for ourselves regardless of our impact to others. So if we are trying to break this idea of how do we change ourselves, how do we behave, how do we act, it might behoove us to break this idea that it's either 0 or 100%, that is either left or right, and that the line might suggest exactly that there is space in the middle for us to walk. And I think that's very helpful as well, because if you are anything like me, and I hope you're not, because I hope you're better than that, you might struggle sometimes with finding the way to get there. Because I think that most people will agree that we all want to be kinder. We all want to be altruistic. We all want to be selflessness. But how do we get there? And that's the question. How do we put these things into practice? And we, specifically Spiritists, we are really concerned with this applicability of things. How do we get quality information which is relevant to our lives, and how do we make that useful? How do we apply that to our lives? So having a sense of a line, of a spectrum, might help us try to find ourselves along that road and see what is ahead. So putting it in a perspective of a line here might help us, immediately see what could be ahead of us, as opposed to say, oh my goodness, I have to all of a sudden become great, right? I have to go from here to here. So this is what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to plot ourselves along the line, try to understand this line a little bit to see how we can change our behavior. But the point here is this kind of thinking, right? I think this kind of thinking of either you do the 10 Commandments or you don't do the 10 Commandments, it's very binary. It was useful for us in a point in time in history where we had to learn how to not to do things to other, but there's got to be more for us today. And so as we shift gears here, then we're going to start thinking about another way of looking at the moral compass and the set of rules that we should do. And the other way of looking this within the Judaico-Christian tradition, or the way that has been more prevalent here in the Western world, is to think of the golden rule. And if you had a chance, our friend Adam from the UK, Adam Osborne, has done a tremendous job of laying down the history of the golden rule and some context on the golden rule in the video that you can even watch here in this channel and the USSF YouTube channel. Go back there if you want to and watch it. And if you're curious about it and you are not watching this live, but you're watching this on playback, I give you full permission to pause myself, go there. If you are interested in the context, hear about all the context, then come back here. I will wait. I will wait on pause for you. But going back to the golden rule here is that this is a set of behaviors, or a philosophy of behaving, I should say, that finds commonality with many different cultures throughout time. But what's really interesting is that sometimes you will hear different versions of the golden rule. Sometimes people would say that the golden rule is to do to others what you would want them to do to you. Other times you might hear people saying, do not do to others what you would not want them to do to you. And at first glance, they seem the same, right? But there is a little difference there that I want to talk to you about, because I think that speaks to mindset. There is a difference, because when we are talking about do not do unto others, the focus here is us, right? We don't want to get hurt. Therefore, we don't want to hurt others. And that is slightly different than do unto others what you would like to have done unto you. Because when we want to do things to other, because we want them to do the same to us, that implies a greater connection between people, right? Whereas a do not do leads us to separate ourselves and say, hey, you stay over there, I stay over here, let's not interact. The do means we are going to interact and live in a world together. And that is a pretty big psychological discrepancy here, or difference, I should say, not discrepancy, a big difference between these two approaches. And that is really interesting, because that goes to mindset. In one side, right, we are saying to the world that we are enough and we don't want anybody else to come into our bubble. And on the other end of things, we're saying we need to interact. We need to have this relationship within things. And this mindset is really interesting, because we've been struggling with it for a while. So check this out. If we were going to really do a quick recap of the golden rule here, we're going to say that 2,000 years before Christ, so about 4,000 years ago, in Egypt, we already had incidents of the golden rule, right? That which you hate to be done to you, do not do to another. So don't do to others what you don't want to be done to you. And in 1300 BC, we have a little bit of a shift again. We have Moses, and we also have thereabouts Exodus, telling us, love your neighbor as yourself. Right? So where Moses tells us a lot of don't do this, the book of Exodus in the in the Judaico tradition tells us that love your neighbor as yourself. And that's that shift already. Said. And look at that. Siri's jumping in here too. She wants to have a word. All right, Siri, you just hold on into the question and answer time. So what's really interesting here is that Exodus is already pointing us that we need to love our neighbor, right? So we went from don't do this to do this. But then we go back again, and we have Siddhartha Gautama, also known as the Buddha, which tells us again, in one of his famous sermons and different things, hurt not others in ways that you yourself find hurtful. So again, don't hurt others, right? So one says, don't hurt others. The other one says, love others. The other one says, don't hurt others. And then we go back up again, in 33 of the Common Era and the Christ, when when disciples Matthew and Luke also shift back to this idea of do unto others. Right? And love your neighbor. We go back again to loving your neighbor, which is pretty great stuff. And then, today, we can look out in the world and say, man, a bunch of people are not okay with that. They are not really doing this love your neighbor as yourself thing. They're really just telling us, do what I want you to do. So clearly we have oscillated in history between don't do this to, hey, we should do this, to don't do this, and you should do this. And now we're like, do what, we're in trouble here. We do what you want me to do. So that's really important because it talks to us about our own mindset. We need to dive deeper into our own beings and really ask ourselves that question. So if with the idea of the 10 Commandments, if with the idea of that early beginnings of the Golden Rule, we find the approach of not doing to others what you don't want them to do unto you, squarely puts us in the middle of that perspective. We are the lens in which the world operates. We're the ones that are saying, hey, we're not going to do to others because we don't want others to do to us. We're not going to do to others because we don't want to get hurt. So we're not going to hurt others, right? That's kind of like the bare minimum. Just don't hurt others because we don't want to be hurt. And that means that in the center of that statement is I, right? I will not do this. I should not do this. You should not do this, right? It's the center of the universe. We're the brightest spot in the world, and that's where we stay. Everybody steps out, like we said before. And then when we add the idea of love your neighbor, we have to start to think about what is it that I should do for my neighbor. And that shifts the perspective a little bit because it's no longer about my fears and my pain. It is about what can I do for the other, right? All of a sudden, we realize that there are other tenants in this place, that we are sharing the apartment, that we have roommates. And we need to start thinking about not only not crossing the boundaries that would perhaps create conflict and challenges, but how can we live together in a harmonious way? And that is really great. That is really great because this psychological perspective is needed, because when there are 7 billion of us, right, sharing the apartment, we need to make sure that we understand that each one of us has the responsibility to care, obviously, for themselves, but also care for those around us. Even from a selfish perspective, you may say, it might make sense to do this, to care for others, because when we care for others, there are 7 other billion people that are caring for us too. So even if we want to be very selfish in many different ways, acting out of kindness and concern for others benefits us because others can take better care of us than we can of ourselves sometimes. And when there's so many more others than there are I's, right? There's 1 to 7 billion. I think that if we all took this approach of being kinder to each other and taking care of our neighbors, we would benefit greatly because we would receive a lot more than we give. So, all right, I hope that makes sense. So let's bring that into perspective again. So let's use our line. Now, if our line of progress in the beginning had just 1 point on the left with selfishness, and now 1 point on the right with happiness and altruism and selflessness, I've plotted 2 in the middle here so that we can gain better perspective. And so in the middle, I want to add self-centeredness and solidarity, because hopefully having these intermediary steps can help us plot ourselves in this line to find out where we are. So if selfishness is just doing whatever it is that we want to do because we want that thing and we don't care about the result to others, right? Self-centeredness, I want to call it self-centeredness, is a little bit different. That is a stage further along where you are doing things because you like them, but you're not stepping on other people to do it. You might bump into them, but it's not because you're doing that on purpose. It's just because you're oblivious that they are there. You're so self-centered that you're not thinking about others. And sometimes you might bump into them and cause damage, but you're not intentionally saying, I'm going to do this regardless of what other people think. You're just not thinking about it. It's a step forward, right? You are not just doing whatever it is that you want at any cost. You're just trying to be happy. You just haven't realized that there are people around you. Step number 3 on the line here will be the next phase of this, when we have developed a little bit of empathy and we realize that we should help each other out, right? That we should do things out of solidarity. This is when maybe we live together with other people and we realize that, they are hurting or they're sick and we should take care of them because they would do that to us too. Right? And so in this moment of solidarity, we are farther along the scale of selflessness or selfishness, whichever way you want to see, where we are beginning to stop thinking just about our own needs, to start thinking and considering that need of others, even if that need still comes because it benefits us, right? Because when I take care of you and we live together, you will take care of me. That's a good thing. And we're part of this membership, we're part of this group, and we only help our group out. But that's better than, just helping yourself out. So that is a step, psychologically speaking, ahead. And of course, we still have at the other end of things, we still have the idea of altruism or selflessness, when we act to help others, not because we think it's going to benefit us, just because we just feel the need to get there. Because it's very hard, right? It's very hard for us to change behavior overnight. We have this idea sometimes that we either are a good person or are not a good person. We're still psychologically living in that first model that we talked about, where we think it's either yes or no. And here, with these other steps in the line, we begin to understand that this is a journey. Right? This is a process that we need to actively and intentionally navigate to get from number 1 to number 4. So there are steps then that we can do in the middle. There are questions that we can do for ourselves to help us point that way. Right? So, for instance, let's use a quick example here to illustrate. Imagine that you are in the line to get something. Right, I used to like to joke that we should think about the line to the DMV, to the Department of Motor Vehicles, because there was always a big line and you always wait forever. But funny enough, the DMV has been getting better, so props to the DMV, and lines are not as horrible as they used to be before. But imagine that you're on the line, right? And then you have somebody that comes in and says, you know what, I'm just going to get to the front of the line. I'm just going to run all you guys over. I don't care. I just need to get to the front of the line, right? That will be selfish, right? That person is trying to get to the front of the line no matter what happens. And they are willing to elbow you, and knock you down in the process. And they are aware of that and they're going to do it. So that's selfishness. Now, self-centeredness is when you get to the DMV and you see that, you need to go all the way to the door, and you, without thinking about it, you just start cutting in the middle of everything. And all of a sudden you bump people, you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you're there. Right? So self-centeredness is when you're so centered on what you want that you haven't realized in what's around you, and you're bumping into people, but you didn't do that on purpose. It's just that you just wanted to get there. You did not even realize people weren't in line too, right? You just figured you're just going to go. Now, solidarity is when you start to thinking like, oh my goodness, there's a big line here. And maybe you work together with somebody else and say, yeah, let's help each other out. Let's, the two of us, find a way to get to the line. Or, you know what, you stay in line for a little bit. I'm going to go outside, drink some water and rest. And then I'll come back and we'll switch places. So you're working together for a specific goal that benefits that small group, right? And number 4, the extreme end here on the goodness side of the line is altruism, is when you are in line and you realize that somebody really needs to get to the end of the line, and you just say, you know what, go ahead, go before me, right? I don't need to understand what's happening or what's going on. I'm not going to get anything out of this, but I'm going to let you go ahead and go ahead in front of me because it seems that you're really needed, you're really desperate, or you are late, or whatever it is. So that's sort of a different perspective there in thinking about how this works. But why do I say that? Well, I say that because this is an important point for us to stop and think about where we are in the world and how do we do things. Because, it might be true that at different moments of our lives and for different things, we may be at different points of this line. So we start asking ourselves, where are we here? Are we in the selfish mode where we are doing things regardless of their impact to others, and we are aware of what's going to happen? Or are we doing things because we're trying to be happy, and sometimes we bump into people? Are we in the self-centered zone, right? Are we in the orange zone over here? Or are we sometimes in between areas? Have we been able to make our climb to the solidarity piece, where we are starting to help each other out as parts of the group, but we only help or are interested in helping each other in the solidarity phase because we are part of a group? Or are we farther along? Are we on our way to the blue zone here, so to speak? Well, if we were to get our 10 commandments and all that stuff before that we talked about, maybe we can say, the 10 commandments were a great way of moving away from number one, right? Before laws in general, we were going to do whatever it is that we wanted, and we were going to step on other people to do it. So with some law and order, with some things like the Hammurabi Code, the first set of laws, with the 10 commandments, it gave us a goalpost that moved us from selfishness towards self-centeredness and solidarity, right? So the 10 commandments could be plopped right there in the middle, perhaps between number 2 and number 3. That's where we go. And then we have then the upgrades, the 10 commandments. We have that positive thinking, right, of the golden rule that tells us that all of a sudden we're not going to have to just do a set of 10 things. We need to think for ourselves. We need to develop our critical thinking, and we need to begin to realize that there are people out there that we could hurt, and we should not harm them. So maybe we place that negative version of the golden rule, and by negative I mean that don't do things, right? Maybe the do not do into each other is somewhere between 2 and 3 as well, right? And maybe the do things, right, to each other is sort of at the phase number 3 there. And so that is an interesting thing, because it's moving us along from being completely self-centered into thinking and understanding that there are other people out there. However, we run into a problem eventually. And this is the problem. If all we are thinking about is about doing unto others what we would like them to do to us, although that is very noble, we are still running potentially into challenges, because I am doing to you what I, Dan, think is best for you. You see here, I am still trapped into my own mindset, in my own world, and I am imposing on you what I think you should do out of kindness in my heart. And I think that's kind of where we are in the world today, where I think I know what's best for you, where I think that I can tell you what is the best way to behave, and if you just follow my way, you're going to be okay. And I'm doing that out of the kindness of my heart. So I think I'm helping you by imposing on you the way that I think about the world. So a silly example of that would be, I like ice cream. And so I think that all of us should eat ice cream. And so I now go and tell everybody that should eat ice cream. But maybe you don't like ice cream. Maybe you're lactose intolerant. Maybe you just prefer something else. But I keep giving you ice cream and try to force you into eat ice cream, because I know that because I like ice cream, you should like ice cream too. And in a way, this example seems really silly. But when you extrapolate that to other things, we might begin to understand where we are in the world. Because many of us are trying to push agendas because we think that agenda will make the world a better place. But other people don't necessarily like their agenda. They have their own, which they're also trying to push on us. And so we sit in our chairs, we go about our lives thinking, why is it that other people don't understand that this will solve the world? If they only did what I'm telling them to do, all of us will be in a better place. And this is really dangerous thinking in a way, because it makes us assume that what we are doing is right because we like it. And we're indirectly saying that everybody else should bend the way they do things to our way of viewing the world. It comes from a good place. but it can do damage to others. Even good intentions sometimes have negative consequences. And so we find ourselves in this modern place when a lot of us have ideas about how to change the world, and we want to share that with others because we think that's going to help them. But that's not what they want. Yet, we are doing to others what we would like them to do to us, right? We are telling them how to behave because that's the behavior that we would like. And we end up then with these set of rules and people saying, you should act this way, or you shouldn't do this way. And they are surprised when other people don't buy in or subscribe to their worldview. Because if it works for them and they're doing it out of the kindness of their minds and their hearts, then why wouldn't other people follow that? It is so obvious, they think. It's so obvious, we think. Need I say more, friends? I mean, we look at our country today, we're politically divided, as if there are only two ways of doing things. One group of people saying you should do things this way, the other group of people thinking we should do things that way, and we cannot absolutely come together. We cannot accept a different way of thinking other than our own, because at the center of all this, at the center of our golden rule, so to speak, mentality is us. The measuring stick of our behaviors, the way we are thinking in this day and age, is us. So we are trying to impose on others our way of thinking, our way of understanding the world, even if it's out of the kindness of our hearts. And so we find ourselves in this impasse, because who's going to be the tiebreaker? If I am thinking that we should do this in one way because I think this is right, and you think otherwise, then how are we going to solve this problem? For as long as I continue to act and think just out of my own mindset and set of experiences, and you are doing the same, we have the potential to butt heads and not find resolution. Because it will take one of us to step outside of our own preconceived notions or belief systems to understand the other and be willing to change. But as long as we remain steadfast on our beliefs that the way we think about things is the right way, we are going to struggle. We are going to make tons of technological progress, but we may not make tons of social and emotional progress. So how do we do this? Well, Fortunately, friends, there is an upgrade to the golden rule that we have missed. We have glanced over and not realized, especially for us who call ourselves Christians. I think that there's an important piece of the puzzle that we are missing. And that part of the puzzle was given to us in the Gospel of John in chapter 13, verse 34. This is a passage at the end of Christ's experience here on earth with us, in that dinner, the Last Supper, when he tells people, a new command I give you, love one another. And that we know, right? We are already told by the Golden Rule and by Exodus and the prophets before that we should maybe love one another. But here's where he raises the bar. He says, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. And that gives us pause. Because the upgrade to the Golden Rule here, the version 2.0 of the Golden Rule it's not about what we think we should do to others. It's not how we should love others. We should love others as he, the Christ, has loved us. All of a sudden, within our soul, we begin to understand that there is a different goalpost, that we are supposed to rise to a higher level, that we need to change our perspective because we have a new measuring stick. We are no longer supposed to aim for doing to others what we want to be done, but we should instead strive to do unto others what he, the Christ, the most elevated spirit we have ever had notice of in this planet, would do to others. And that is a fundamental shift from everything that we have been told, because we are being asked by divinity, by the Creator, by the good spirits, by whatever is most noble, because the Christ can also be understood as the personification of divinity, of everything else that's most noble. He was such a high level of understanding, of ethical living, of comprehension, that he was able to see the world from a different perspective. And he is a new measuring stick. And what is that new perspective then, you ask? Well, fortunately, we are very well equipped to understand that through Spiritism, because the knowledge that we have developed over time since the 1860s, that has led us to re-understand or re-evaluate the teachings of the Christ and see them in a different light, to go back to the origins of his teachings in general. When we think, or we start to think as the Christ did, we shift the perspective outside of ourselves and think of the whole. The Christic thinking about things is a global, or is a cosmic one. And if we look at the life of the Christ, we might have some inclinations, we might have some tips on how to change this perspective, because he was not about advancing himself. He was not about doing to others what he wanted others to do unto him. He was at a higher level where he was doing to others what they needed, not what we wanted. And through his life, we see that. We see him constantly giving to others patiently, respecting their perspectives. We see the Christ being with everybody around him, never denying company to any people that really wanted to be with him, never favoring some over others. That is an amazing thing, because nowadays we're so divided. The color of our skin divides us, our gender divides us, our sexual orientation divides us. We are putting so many barriers to other people because they are not like us, or they do not live the way we want to lead our lives. And yet, the message of the Christ is fundamentally different. He's saying everybody should be worthy of their own choices. And furthermore, he shows us an important concept that transforms our perspective of the world, of the cosmos, and of ourselves. He comes back after he has been crucified. He comes back after death to show us that we continue in spirit form, that this life that we lead, this life, this physical life, in many ways is a life of illusion, because it's not everything. And when we begin to understand that we too are going to do that which he has done, because he has told us that, he says, everything I do, you will be able to do, means that we too are going to survive this physical body, that this physical body is temporary, that we are going to come back. We are going to, quote, quote, resurrect spiritually. And we are going to find ourselves after the end of our lives, still us. And when that happens, it really changes the way we look at life, because it takes away a great amount of the fears we have. And a lot of the fears we have nowadays are still instinctual fears. It's the fear of dying. It's the fear of disappearing, of stop mattering. That need for connection that we have, of being heard and supported, the love that we need, that needs not be worried about. Those fears need not be fed, because if we are going to live forever, then we are going to be okay. We are never going to cease to be who we are. And that's, my friends, I find it so uplifting and so transformative. It's absolutely incredible, because as we begin to understand that we are immortal spirits created by God, a God that we have still trouble understanding, a lot of new paths unfold before our eyes. A lot of new things come to our perspective. First and foremost, we begin to understand how much we are loved, because a greater creator, a greater force that we are unaware of in full, we don't understand completely, created us, and not for a short period of time. That force, That love created us to be forever. And when we realize that the force has also created everyone and everything around us to be forever in a spiritual sense. And so if I am going to live forever, if my essence, who I am, transcends time and space and will be there for all ages since, what a wonderful thing. I will have time to work on everything that I need to do. I can take my time enjoying the moment and focusing on the moment. I don't need to worry about always looking to the future and doing more things and not being present. But most importantly, it also gives me the certainty. And here is where our thinking like the Christ really becomes beautiful. It really expands my horizon because I realize that God loves me so much that created me for a whole eternity and every other living being. So when I look at a different living being, I also see people just like me who are going to live forever, who are in a process of constant evolution. They're just temporarily clad in specific clothing. So when I look at my wife, when I look at my kids, when I look at my friends, I no longer see just my wife, my friends, my kids. I see spirits, immortal spirits who are so loved by God, they are created to be immortal, dressed in that shape for the time being. And I know that they too will change with time because I change and I grow with time. And when that happens, I become more tolerant. I feel a sense of connection. And my heart leaps because I feel more inclined to help others because I begin to understand a little bit better why I am here, to grow and evolve, as our good spirits tell us in question 132 of the Spirits book, but also to help others grow as well, because we are related, we are connected. And what brings extreme joy to my heart, I must tell you, to be honest, is the fact that they will never cease to be either. The relationships that we have around us will never stop being. We are just under the spell, this illusion that our relationships are going to end, that when people that we love die, that we have lost and missed them. But that is not the case, because we're immortal. And that means that everybody you love will continue to love you even after they're gone. So if they die, if they lose their physical lives, be it because of old age, be it because of COVID or another illness or an accident, they are going to continue to love you from the other side, much the same way you are going to continue to love him or her from this side. Because after all, when they discarnate, we don't stop loving them, do we? And so now that we know that they're immortal spirits, why do you think that they will stop loving us? Why do we think that we have lost them and they're no longer with us? That is not the case. They are there. We are the ones telling ourselves that we are separated, but we're not separated. We're actually quite a bit connected. And so it is about, at the end of the day, a mind shift. It is about us giving ourselves permission to shift our perspectives and understand that in our journey, we ought to be reminded of this different goalpost, of this different way of thinking that helps us navigate this line, that changes our perspective, that completely transforms the way we see life, so that we can move from selfishness through self-centeredness, work our way towards being kind to each other in solidarity, even if it's in small groups that benefit each other, until we get to a point where we can transform ourselves into something greater. And the interesting piece here is that this process of transformation here is this process of realization of our immortal essence and of love. Because at the end of the day, everything we do is out of a need for love. We have the need to feel loved. We have the need to feel accepted, to feel important, to feel cared for. And in selfishness, we are trying to find that need in things that are immediately available to us in this physical world. And we step on other people to get that love that we think we need. But guess what? What we are seeking is really not love at this point. What we're seeking is an egotistical, selfish way of pleasing ourselves. But that doesn't last. So we keep doing it because we're so desperately looking for that fulfillment outside of ourselves that we will do whatever it takes. But as we begin to realize that there are other people in the world doing the same thing, and we move forward through self-centeredness and solidarity, we begin to understand that the love we seek come not from this world, come not from things and status and achievement, but comes from doing the right thing, from having the consciousness and the conscience of being at peace with ourselves, of knowing that we are doing the right thing and respecting each other because we have begun to understand who we are as immortal spirits that will never stop being. And therefore, we begin to love ourselves a little bit more and know that we need not step on others, and that stepping on others has consequences for which we are going to have to be responsible, because there is a consequence to every action. So if our consequence is that of pain and suffering to others, we are going to have to bear the fruits of that in a future life. And that transforms us. And these 4 steps then begin to give us a way of moving forward and transforming ourselves. And this transformation can happen as quickly or as slowly as you want. You are in charge. God loves you so much that has put you on this earth so that you can decide how fast and where you go. Because God knows that you need to make those choices. Because somebody else telling you what to do, giving you commandments, giving you perspectives, are not going to teach you how to act and behave, because they are just rules. You have to learn the causes and consequences of your own actions and how they interact with each other. You have to learn by doing. That is how we internalize things. And this advancement in this line then can happen as fast or as slowly as you want to. You know, I have spent this past year really reflecting on perhaps one of the greatest personal transformations, the transformation of a man called Saul to a man called Paul. And as you might be familiar with the story, he starts as perhaps the most vehement opponent to Christianity, to early Christianity, and to the ideas contained in the Christ, and then becomes perhaps its greatest exponent. And so I've spent the last year thinking about how that happens and what kind of impact it can have on us. And so I'm really glad to be wrapping the whole book thing, because it's been my companion. And in this road, in this line of advancement in many different ways, we find Paul reflected. And Paul is also a reflection of us, right? In the beginning, we act out of selfishness. We just want to get things for ourselves. We're still a level 1. But then all of a sudden, we go to level 2 on our map there, on our line, when we begin to seek happiness for our lives. We begin to stop being as selfish, and we're still searching for things, but something in us is doing it because we think is right, but we're not thinking about other people just yet. And then along the road, we begin to find that we should be kind to others. So maybe we can say that, you know, on the Christian tradition, Saul is going from number 2. He's acting on what he believes is right. He believes that everybody should not listen to this new message of the Christ. And somewhere between 2 and 3, he has an encounter, a mystic encounter with the Christ on the road to Damascus, hence the title of the book. And he begins to shift his perspective, and he realizes that his perspective of self-centeredness, what he was thinking about before, was not necessarily right, even if he had good intentions. But that his good intentions, the way they were before, were causing damage and harm to others. So in that moment, he makes an extreme choice. He decides, I'm going to change everything about me. It doesn't mean that you need to change everything about you today, but he makes that switch. And it's a beautiful transformation with lots of lessons that we don't go into. But he goes in that moment, in the middle of the road to Damascus, where he is on the number 2 stage of our line. He begins to shift quickly to number 3, where he begins to understand that he needs to help other people, not just his people. And he jets out into 4 territory. And by the end of his life, he has given himself so much to others because he has understood this new spiritual reality. He has understood that he is here to serve as well, in addition to growing himself, that he becomes one of the greatest lights that we have ever seen in our history. So, why do I speak about Paul? I speak about Paul because his transformation is an incredible barometer to our own. It gives us tips and tricks. It gives us guidance on how we can change ourselves and how we can move along that line. And ultimately, what I really want us to take away from here is this idea that we are in control. And we should ask ourselves, which way do we go? Maybe we can spend some time and ask ourselves, should I be in number 3? Should I be number 2? Should I be number 4? Am I acting as number 1? And it's okay to understand that we may act differently for different things. Maybe when it comes to my professional life, I'm really at number 1. And maybe when it comes to my family life, I am number 3. You're not just one number. You're not just in one space. You are in many spaces in different places, right? At different paces. You have to figure it out and think about this situation and say, hey, am I acting out of my own will and desire to get what I want, regardless of what's happening to others? Or did I just not notice they were there? Or am I already at a phase where I am trying to be kind to others because I understand that it's needed for them and for me, and I'm just doing that? Or have I been able to go to the extreme and say, I'm going to do things for others in this area of my life because it brings me joy? But it's to practice. It's to repetition that really makes things settle in our soul. And so this new commandment that we propose today is one of upgrading our perspective, of changing our measuring stick so the world can change too. That we remove ourselves from the equation, so to speak, that we start to include in our thinking a higher perspective, that of the Christ, that Spiritism explains better for us who have not yet understood it, because it tells us of our essence being spiritual. And as we wake up, if we wake up every day and we remind ourselves, I am a spirit in a temporary journey in this time and place. I am temporarily in this body. I was sent here to grow, to learn, and in the process to help others. I guarantee you our actions are going to begin to transform. The way we behave towards the world will slightly change. Will it change overnight? No. Not even Paul. Not even Paul changed overnight. But with time and effort and a little help from our friends on both sides of life, we can do this. All we have to do is to choose and stick to that decision. So let us remind ourselves of these beautiful words of our older brother, Jesus, infinitely wiser than we are today, telling us that it is time for a new command, that we love each other, not as we want to be loved, but as he loved us, as he taught us the way. Let's give other people the grace and the love that Christ would have given us and them. Let us think of them as spiritual beings too, and understand that everything around us is temporary, and that which is true, our spiritual essence and the spiritual essence of everyone around us, will last forever. So let's work on those bonds. Let's work on moving forward and understanding that this world is but a second in our existence. And I think that when we make this shift to spiritual thinking versus physical thinking, when we get to the territory of beginning to think a little bit like Christ, we might find a tremendous joy in our heart too, because we know that everything that we care about, the love with others, love for ourselves, will never be extinguished, that we have absolutely everything we ever need right here and right here. So in this world, my request, my plea to you is that you go out there and you be the best version of yourself, your spiritual self that you can be, because the world needs us. We are growing, we're learning to love ourselves, we're learning to love others, but that in itself will be enough for us to transform this world into a world of strife, a world of challenges, a world of conflict, a world of pain for many, into a beautiful world of collaboration and happiness for all. So thank you. Thank you for your time today. And I hope that I get to meet you in this road that we're all taking together. And I hope that we'll continue to exchange ideas and remind each other of our spiritual nature.
So thank you so much, Dan, for this great, inspiring talk. And also, like Kirsten commented here, it was great to have a sneak peek of the book, to talk about Paul and Saul and Paul, and like you said, at least 3 years in the desert to be in the making of all this process that normally we as Spiritists are really striving to accomplish, because we also understand that how hard it is for us to do these transformations. We have so many questions, and we will try to contemplate them all. So start with this one for Kirsten. Don't we need to acquire emotional intelligence in order to decide or make sense of where we are on this road to self-growth?
Hey, Kirsten, it's great to hear from you and great to see your smiley face over there. Yes, but let me also offer a different perspective here, a different way of thinking. We have that emotional intelligence. And sometimes we also struggle in, how do I get that emotional intelligence? And I think that for me, what the beauty of Spiritism is that we can arrive at these things in a slightly different way that's almost like a magic bullet for everything else. Once we think of ourselves as spirits, and once we realize that everybody is a spirit, we start to develop that emotional intelligence. We start to understand that we're not this shape and size, and nobody is. And that if I have feelings, they have feelings too. So that emotional intelligence, I think, is a development, is a display that we are moving along that line, that we are moving away from selfishness, right? And self-centeredness, and then we're going to solidarity. In a way, you can say that that whole line is a path of social emotional intelligence and learning, because we are really learning that we have to deal with our feelings. And isn't it funny that we are searching for love and tenderness and affection and acceptance from the outside world so badly that sometimes we don't even know what we feel. Sometimes we're so desperate for acceptance that we haven't even understood what we're seeking. We just want that love, but we don't even know how to get. And sometimes we ask people, how are you feeling? And they're like, I don't know. They don't even know what's troubling them, because we have not spent time reflecting on, how am I feeling? What am I feeling right now in this moment? Am I feeling anger, frustration? As a matter of fact, if you do like a feelings inventory, if you ask yourself, give yourself 60 seconds, for instance, get a piece of paper and list all the feelings that you know. There are hundreds of different feelings out there. You can find lists of feelings, right, of social emotional learning and everything else in the web. But people struggle to understand, am I feeling frustrated? Am I feeling angry? Am I feeling abandoned? Like, we don't even have the vocabulary sometimes to express how we feel. And that's a problem, because if we don't know how we feel, we don't know what to do to fulfill that need. And if we don't know how to fulfill that need, we are going to be like, blind at night. We are just going to go anywhere trying desperately to get a little bit of fulfillment. And that is why sometimes we step on each other, because we haven't had that journey of understanding ourselves. So in many ways, I feel like this journey of going from selfishness to selflessness, or from selfishness to altruism, is a journey of coming in contact with our own feelings and needs and understanding them. It is very okay, friends, to think of our own needs and feelings. Being altruistic doesn't mean forgetting who you are. It just meaning finding the joy in helping other people, because you cannot forget who you are. God has not created you for you to erase yourself. When we talk about transforming to something else, and those poetic, beautiful images that we get, through literature, to even Paul himself, when he says, it is the Christ that lives in me, he's not saying that Paul does not exist. He's saying that he has found joy in acting and behaving in that line of thinking. It brings him joy individually to act like the Christ, because that is the way to attain happiness. So that question is amazing, Kirsten, because it has to do a lot with the challenge of our times. We are not being given the time and the training to understand our feelings. And we still struggle. We still struggle even with asking for help to understand our feelings. We still have a stigma, for instance, on people going and talking about mental health. And mental health, it's that struggle with our emotions, with our perception of the world. We still struggle in going to a psychologist. I mean, we're so fortunate that today, that's not as cliche or not as taboo as it was before. But 10 years ago, people were crazy if they went to a psychologist or psychiatrist. And now we're learning that we all need a little coaching in different parts of our lives to make sense of the world around us, and that we should stop and make sense of the world around us too. The cure to the problems is not going to come from a pill from the outside world. That might help, might be necessary for a while, but ultimately the journey is within. And that emotional intelligence, that social emotional learning that needs to take place is key to everything else we do. Without that, we are not going to be able to advance the line. So it's a great question, Kirsten.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. And in fact, if we think about it, we are even afraid to face our own emotions. Right?
So scary. Yes.
Yeah. So let's see here. We have a question from Glaucio as well. How to handle those moments when we realize in practice that we are not as altruistic as we would expect?
Hi, Glaucio. Another excellent question. And this is a tricky one, I find, because as we begin in our journey from left to right on our line, right, and we begin to try to become more altruistic, we begin to realize, as we develop that social emotional stuffing that Kirsten was talking about, and we become more inwards facing, as Jusara was talking about, which is so hard, right? Because we want to not look at our dark spots. We begin to realize that maybe we are not as great as we would like to be. And why is it that we would like to be great? Well, there's a spark within us, but there's also this this desire to accept ourselves. And when we look at this altruistic piece and we realize that we're not as great, we begin doubting ourselves again, and we feel like, oh my goodness, I'm not as good as I was. So I'm really, really bad. So it becomes a vicious cycle, because we're looking for that validation from the outside world. And when we realize that that's really not there, and that we are not as great as we are, we struggle, right? We struggle because we had this image of ourselves, and maybe that is not as true as we wanted it to be, so that we feel loved. And it's really a trap, because when we have those feelings of shame or frustration with ourselves, it's still that selfish part of us that wants that validation and is afraid to realize that we are immortal beings. But when we begin to look at ourselves and understand us in a higher perspective, and without, reference points, without comparing us to other people, you say, you know what? I am not as altruistic as I could be. And that's okay. Right now I'm not, but now I know that there is a path for me to get there, because I also understand that I'm an immortal spirit that has many incarnations, in the future, and that has had many incarnations in the past. And this is not something that's going to come over time, but I can work at it. So we need to replace that fear that we have of being found out as not being great people. I think all of us has a little bit of like imposter syndrome, where we really feel like, oh my goodness, like what if people find out that I'm not as good as I look, Like, we don't realize that people don't think we're great, but we think people think we're great, right? And so what if they find out that I'm really not that great? What if I found out that I'm human? We're so desirous of their acceptance that we're thinking in a different way. We're trying to find that satisfaction elsewhere. And when we struggle with our own sense of self-worth, it's indication too for all of us, and this is so normal, that we need to do some soul searching and go back to that basics and understand that where we are today is a good place to be. It is okay to be who you are, because the biggest lie out there in the world is that everybody has it figured out. We worry about not being as altruistic because we think that people are ahead of us, that people are better. And there is no competition. There is no race here. There is no comparison between you and other people, because you are different people with different experiences and different reincarnatory paths. So when you find yourself feeling that you're not as altruistic, don't let that beat you, over the head. Don't let that discourage you. Instead, just look analytic at things and say, you know what? Now I know what are the things that I need to work on, and I'm going to work on that. And with time, you're going to get there. And that's the way to go. And it will take as much time as you want it to, and you're going to be okay, because fundamentally, you remain loved. And this is something that we forget. We are constantly 100% of the time loved, right? We struggle with that. We are loved all the time, people. If there's one thing that we could remind ourselves every day, is that we are loved even when we are not aware of it. God loves us all the time, right? Our brother Jesus loves us all the time. And maybe these are so far away that's hard to understand, but imagine those who live around you. They love you. And imagine those who have gone before you, your mothers and your fathers, if they're in the spiritual plane, they continue to love you. And imagine now that you have had many reincarnations, and you have had mothers and fathers and cousins and partners and sisters and brothers and friends. All those people still love you, even if you don't remember who they are, even if they're not around you. When you make the math, when you make the spiritual math, there's so much love coming to us at any given point in our existence that is overwhelmingly beautiful. We're just not aware of it. So if you're getting yourself down because you realize you're not as altruistic as you want to be, take that as a push forward, but don't let that hold you back. Because at the end of the day, you have as much time as you need to get there, and you will get there.
Oh, I just love the imposter syndrome. It's so great. Actually, it's something that I'm sure we all feel like this. And Kirsten made a comment here. In a way, it is really touching about self-compassion, which is something that I think it's so important for all of us to think about it all the time, because I think sometimes we expect so much from us and from ourselves, from our behaviors. And like you said, it is a process. It's not going to happen overnight. And we have to understand and to accept it, and to keep on doing what we have to do, right? So let's see, we have another question here. Daniel Santos. In order to do good to others, we're supposed to know what is good in the first place, right? Thus, don't you think how don't you think how
That
what is
knowing what is good.
What is good would be the first step. Some people have self-destruction habits, and they want to impose to others in the name of being good stuff. What is your thoughts on that?
So, hi, Daniel, and Raphael there on the picture too. Yes, I think that's exactly the point that we're making, right? We think we know what's best, but we don't. And I think that is the challenge of our times, because we have imposed on others what we think is best. But when Jesus calls us in that verse in John to love others as he had loved us, it is a clue for us to change our perspectives and understand that our measuring stick, what we think how the world should work, is not enough, because we don't know what is good yet. We know parts of it, right? But Instead, if we think how he thought, and he knew way more than we do, right? And he knows way more than we do, then our conception of what is good changes. We're no longer going by what we think is good, but we're learning from him about what is good. So this psychological shift that we're doing from trying to use our moral standards, to judge the world, and not judge in a bad way, but like to make sense of the world. When we shift that to try to use his moral understanding and ethical standards to see the world, it is an exercise of us trying to upgrade our understanding of what really is good. So I think you nailed it, because we're using a measuring stick that it doesn't measure well. It only measures what we think. And when we use Jesus' measuring stick, it's a bigger one, right? We have more perspective. We have a more encompassing way to go. So yes, and that's why I like Spiritism so much, because one of the things that we learn in the Spirits book, and it's one of my favorite questions, is that, the Kardec asks the good spirits, and he asks, does emotional or moral progress come before or after intellectual progress? And the spirits answer, emotional and moral progress is a consequence of intellectual progress. Like, so it always comes after. Why? Because we need to understand things to be able to apply. And so as we are shifting to the Christ mindset, to the Christ mentality, we have to necessarily first understand what it is. And that is still very hard for us. It's very hard for us to understand things. And that's why we like to study and ponder and think and conjecture about things, because we need to try to understand this new way of thinking that is higher than our current way of thinking. And so unless we understand that, we are not going to be able to put that into practice. So Jesus gives us a great tip in saying, basically, right? I'm paraphrasing, but don't quote me on this. He's basically saying, don't think and try to solve problems as you would normally do. Try to think as I would when I am solving the problem, because it would help you shift outside of yourself to see a different perspective. And that's key. And that is the hardest part, because, among other things, we also have an interesting version of Jesus that we have accepted throughout history, right? It's a whole different conversation. But, when we look back to the life of Jesus and we look back to what people tell us we should do based on what they understand of the Christ, sometimes these are very different things, right? So I say, ask yourself what version of the Christ you have in your mind and your hearts, and go back and read about his life and his doings and see if that matches. Because the Christ that a lot of people tell you about these days is a Christ that chooses some people over others, that, it's not really accepting. There's even Christ versions out there that people tell you that Christ will have you vote one way or another. It's inconceivable to me, when I look at the life of Christ, to see a Christ that will choose some over others. So that's a whole different conversation, but you nailed it. It's about us understanding a new mindset of what is good. And the closest to good that we have ever seen on this planet is the Christ. So if we think that we can get a little bit closer to him, we are going to get a little bit closer to the ultimate good.
Okay, so we have one last question before we go. One that is unfortunately quite common, and people feel this way so many times. When I do good, I'm not appreciated, so I lose the motivation to continue doing good. What should I do?
Guilty as charged, right? I think we all have that, and it's not normal. But let's look at this from that line perspective, right? From that understanding on the Christ. You see, the challenge here, and that is why it's so hard for us, is that we are operating on outside validation. We are wanting that we get a pat on the back and, a tap on the head and say, good boy, right? Like we do sometimes with our dogs, right? And we get them treats. We are looking for the love and that motivation from the outside world, because that's how we have been told that we should do. And because we're so insecure, we have not looked within ourselves. We think that that's what we need. We're so desperately, all of us are hurting for love and acceptance, and we're looking for that from the world. And the world, this world that changes its mind every 10 seconds, and the world that does not last, cannot give us this life, this fulfillment for our lives. And so what if we changed that perspective and said, instead of outside validation, I am going to spend some time with me in the inside, and I'm going to ask myself whether I did a good job, whether that was really good, right? Because it's a lot easier to get that outside validation because it takes no effort, right? Because somebody else is giving you. But that happiness that comes from the outside world won't make us happy forever. It just lasts a tiny little bit, right? But the happiness that the Christ gives us, that one lasts, it tells us. And it's not Christ the person, but it's the knowledge and understanding of this evolutionary process. What if when you do something good, instead of waiting for the world to appreciate it, because truth is, the world might not even know how to appreciate it because it might not be in the world's value set, right? You might be doing something so great for others, and this world sometimes is a little bit selfish. So the world is so self-centered that the world may not even be paying attention to you at that moment in time, even though you did something great. But you know what you have done. In your conscience, in your mind, you are going to be able to tell. And guess what? It's also okay for you to be happy with yourself for something that you've done. Sometimes we feel the sense of guilt and saying, oh my goodness, I feel like I should not be happy about what I've done because I'm not a good person. No, it's okay for you to reflect and say, you know what? I think I did that well. That's good. I think you can give yourself a pep talk too, right? But it is true that we're seeking fulfillment from the world. And it's nice when the world gives us that fulfillment. It's nice, but it won't last because the world will not last. So let's look for our fulfillment elsewhere. Let's look into our hearts, into our minds, and exercise our ability to make sense of things and see if we have done a good job. And I guarantee you that in the beginning, it's hard because you think that you never do a good job. All of us are so, in trouble with ourselves sometimes that we feel like we cannot do anything right. Just like Josara said, like we don't spend time looking into ourselves. But when we do, and we remember that we're mortal beings and that we look from the outside world, we're going to be okay. And if you're struggling, here's a tip. Think about how Jesus would look at and say of the things that you are doing. Not a judgy Jesus, because Jesus is not judgy, but if you do something, how would Jesus talk to you and think of you in that moment? If you've done something great, would he be proud of you? I think he would. So just hang on to that. That satisfaction will come, but it requires a little bit of effort, but it's worth it because once it's yours, it can never be taken away. The world can take things away from you, but when they are yours, they cannot be taken away.
Great, Dan. Thank you so much. That was wonderful to have you here. It's always very enlightening, and the way you present and how people can relate. This topic was amazing and so appropriate for everything that we are living now, where we're being invited to really, truly think outside of the box. Although now we are all basically confined in ours, and so we normally see and ask if our guest speaker would accept to do the final prayer for us. But if you're tired, we can do it.
Now, I'll be glad to. Thank you, Josara, for the invitation. Thank you for all the friends who are there. We saw so many different names there. I saw Justin, I saw Abby. Kirsten is obviously there. We saw Glaucio. So many people. Audimar, Jose. Thank you so much, guys, for spending the time with us. And thank you, too, if you're watching this on video. It's great that the USSF has given us this ton of resources for us to go back to and use and listen to that. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And it'll be my absolute honor to raise our thoughts together in this moment and try to connect to that which is greater, to calm our minds and our bodies for a second, to breathe in this second, this moment in time, and just take it all in and tell ourselves that even though the world outside is going through a lot of transformations, that lots of things are happening and seem sometimes very scary and very difficult, and sometimes we don't know where things are, in this moment, right here, right now, we are okay. We are okay right now. And so whether we close our eyes or keep our eyes open, let's just celebrate this connection to this moment in time. Let us open our hearts to the idea that God, or whatever name you want to call it, the creating force of the universe, has created us to live forever. And that we are going to withstand these difficult times and any other difficult time that will come our way. That sometimes we get frantic because we are worried about things, and that is okay. But let us remind ourselves of our divine spark, of the essence of who we are, that will transcend this challenge, this time. Let us remind ourselves that we have been on this journey from selfishness to selflessness for a while, that we have had many great achievements along the way. Let's celebrate those. There may be parts of our life that perhaps are not as figured out as we would like, but we are on our way, and we are grateful to the good spirits and God that continuously whisper guidance into our soul's ears, that continuously speak to our hearts and inspire us to continue to go forward on our march to selflessness and personal fulfillment. So we ask God for strength to face the problems that no doubt we are going to have to face, because we are here to learn. And also to have a quiet mind and a quiet heart to take in this good advice from the good spirits that surround us. To be able to listen, to stop, to make time to reflect about who we are and what we are, immortal spirits. May we have the fortitude to start our days thinking about the opportunities we are going to have to practice everything that we have learned, and remind ourselves that we are here in this place, in this life, because we were prepared for it, that we are here to solve challenges, to figure things out, and that we're never alone, not for a second. So today, here connected via this teleconference, we expand our bonds of love to all of us, to all our friends in the United States, the United States Spiritist Federation, to all our friends elsewhere in the world as well. You too are part of our family. We are grateful for you, the way you are, who you are, and how you are. And we ask nothing else of you. We just want to be close with you. We just want to be on the same road with you. And we are honored that you're there with us. May we continue to grow in understanding and in love. And may we always have the love and support from God above. So be it.
So be it. Thank you. So before we close, just a reminder, next Saturday, October 24, we will be back. This time we will have our friend Daniel Ortiz. Daniel is from Belgium, and he's going to be talking to us about forgiveness and charity, hand in hand with spiritual evolution. So we will see you next week. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone from TVC. Thank you, everyone from the United States Spiritist Federation, all of you that are following us on this journey, our series of talks every Saturday at 11 a.m. U.S. time.